Widowed at 26, with a rusted tool barn and nothing else, what she found changed her. If you've ever been handed a future that felt like a slap in the face, a cruel joke played by a universe with a sick sense of humor, then you know where my story begins. If this is your first time here, consider subscribing. We talk about the hard things, the unexpected turns, and the strength we find when we think there's none left. The lawyer's office was designed to feel unimposing. Soft gray walls, a ficus tree in the corner that was probably plastic, a framed print of sailboats on a placid sea. It was the kind of decor meant to soothe you while your life was being dismantled, piece by legal piece. Mr. Henderson, a man whose face seemed permanently set to mildly apologetic, slid a single sheet of paper across the polished mahogany desk. "This," he said, his voice as gray as the walls, "is the final disposition of Mr. Albright's estate." My husband, Liam Albright, the name still felt like a stone in my mouth. It had only been 3 months since the accident, a stretch of time that felt both like a blink and an eternity. 3 months of sympathetic casseroles from neighbors, of fumbling condolences from his work colleagues, of waking up in the empty half of a bed and forgetting, for one brutal second, why it was cold. I looked at the paper. It was full of dense, legal jargon, but my eyes snagged on the few words I could understand. Last will and testament. Sole beneficiary, Clara Albright. And then the part that made the air leave my lungs. The property listed as Lot 7B, Northridge, consisting of 1 outbuilding, hereafter referred to as the barn, and the 1/4 acre of unimproved land upon which it sits. I blinked, reading it again. And again. My mind refused to process it. The sailboats on the wall blurred. "The barn?" I asked, my voice a dry whisper. "That's it?" We'd driven past it once. Liam had pointed it out. A collapsing structure of corrugated tin and rotting wood, sitting on a forgotten patch of gravel and weeds miles out of town. He'd laughed. "My grandfather's old folly. Used it to store tools for the farm that was sold off 50 years ago. Can you believe that thing is still standing?" I'd laughed with him. It was a ruin, a landmark of decay. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, a small, nervous sound. And the contents therein, of course. He gave me a thin, practiced smile. His tools. I stared at him. The life insurance policy had been just enough to cover the funeral and the mountain of medical bills the hospital had so kindly sent. Our apartment was a rental. The car was leased. We had a joint savings account with less than $1,000 in it. For 5 years, I had believed we were building a life. A small life, a quiet one, but a life. And this was the punchline. A rusted tin box on a patch of dirt and a set of old wrenches. "There must be a mistake," I said, the words feeling clumsy. "We had plans. We were saving for a house. Liam wasn't careless." "The accounts have been settled," Mr. Henderson said, his tone shifting from apologetic to professionally firm. It was the tone of a man delivering bad news on an hourly basis. "There were significant debts, Ms. Albright. More than you might have been aware of. The estate is, for all intents and purposes, insolvent. The barn was the only asset protected from the creditors due to a rather complex trust structure his grandfather established. It's yours. Free and clear. Free and clear." The words were a mockery. I felt a cold anger begin to bloom in my chest, pushing aside the grief. It was an ugly, bitter feeling. Liam, the man who held me when I had nightmares, the man who made me tea every single morning, the man who promised me forever, had left me with nothing but a pile of junk. It wasn't just carelessness. It felt like a betrayal. A final, silent message that our life together hadn't been worth protecting. "I see," I said, my voice flat. I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor. The sound was too loud in the quiet room. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Henderson." He handed me a large manila envelope. "The deed is in here, and the key to the padlock. It's an old lock. You may have some trouble with it." I took the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy, weighted with all the things I didn't understand. I walked out of that office, past the plastic tree and the placid sailboats, and into the harsh afternoon sun. The life I thought I had was gone. In its place was a quarter-acre of weeds and a building that was one stiff breeze away from becoming a pile of splinters and rust. And a question that burned behind my eyes: who was the man I had married? The days that followed were a blur of cardboard boxes and packing tape. The apartment, our first home, shrank with every item I wrapped in newspaper. Each photo frame, each coffee mug, each book from the shelf was a fresh wound. This was ours. Now it was just mine. And soon, it wouldn't even be that. The lease was up at the end of the month, and my part-time job at the library wasn't enough to cover the rent on my own. I was being evicted by circumstance. I found myself talking to Liam, or at least to the ghost of him that haunted the sun-dusted rooms. "Why, Liam," I'd whisper, holding a worn flannel shirt of his to my face, trying to find his scent in the fabric. A barn? After everything? What was I supposed to do with a barn? The silence that answered was vast and suffocating. My anger was a constant, simmering companion. It was easier than the grief. Grief was a vast, deep ocean that threatened to drown me. Anger was a shield. It was a story I could tell myself. He was reckless. He was secretive. He didn't love me enough to provide for me, to protect me. He had left me. And he had left me with nothing. The manila envelope from the lawyer sat on the kitchen counter, an accusation in paper form. I avoided looking at it for a week. Inside was the deed, a folded, crisp document that legally bound me to a pile of garbage. And the key. A single, heavy, old-fashioned iron key, pitted with rust. It looked like something from a pirate movie. The key to my new kingdom of dirt and disappointment. My sister Chloe called every night. "What are you going to do, Clara? You can come stay with me, you know that." "I know," I'd say, my voice tired. "I just need to figure things out." "Figure what out?" "Sell the junk heap. Sell the tools for scrap. Take what you can get and come home." It was practical advice. It was the only logical thing to do. The property was an hour's drive north, in a part of the county that was more trees than people. The land itself was worthless, wedged between a state forest and an old, disused quarry. No one would want it. But the scrap metal, that might be worth a few $100s. Enough for a security deposit on a tiny, sad apartment somewhere. The thought of it filled me with a profound sense of failure. This was my inheritance, a few $100s from the scavenged remains of my husband's legacy. It felt like picking over bones. One evening, fueled by cheap wine and self-pity, I finally pulled everything from the envelope. I spread the deed on the floor, the legal description of Lot 7B, the surveyor's marks, the official stamps. It was all so formal, so concrete. This piece of forgotten land was mine. I picked up the key. It was cold and solid in my hand. I looked around the half-empty apartment, at the stacks of boxes that represented 5 years of a shared life. And I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Liam's final act be a mystery. I wasn't going to sell his memory for scrap metal without at least looking it in the eye. I needed to see it. I needed to stand on that patch of worthless dirt, see that collapsing barn, and understand the full scope of what he had left me. I needed to know the shape of his betrayal. The next morning, I packed a small bag, filled a thermos with coffee, and put the last of my savings into the gas tank of my beat-up sedan. I put the iron key in my pocket. It felt like I was heading to a final confrontation, a reckoning with a ghost. As I pulled out of the apartment complex for the last time, I didn't look back. There was nothing there for me anymore. There was only the road ahead, leading to a place I didn't want to go, and a truth I was terrified to find. The drive north was a slow transition from concrete to green. The city's gray sprawl gave way to suburbs, then to rolling farmland, and finally, to dense, unforgiving forest. The highway narrowed to a two-lane county road, the asphalt cracked and patched. The sky, which had been a clear, hopeful blue when I left, was now bruised with clouds the color of slate. It felt appropriate, a pathetic fallacy for my pathetic journey. I followed the directions Mr. Henderson had printed for me, turning onto a gravel road marked only by a faded wooden sign that had long since lost its lettering. The car bounced and rattled, kicking up dust. The trees crowded in on either side, their branches interlocking overhead, creating a tunnel of shifting green and shadow. It was beautiful, in a wild, untamed way that made me feel small and unwelcome. After another mile, I saw it, just as I remembered. Set back from the road, almost swallowed by overgrown blackberry bushes and towering weeds, was the barn. It was worse than I recalled. The corrugated tin walls were streaked with long, weeping trails of rust. Several panels were missing entirely, leaving dark, gaping holes. The roof sagged in the middle, looking like a tired old man slumping his shoulders. The whole structure leaned slightly to the east, as if a strong wind had tried to push it over and it had only just managed to resist. I pulled the car over onto the weedy shoulder and killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the chirping of unseen insects and the rustle of wind in the tall trees. This was it, my inheritance, my future. It was a joke, a cruel cosmic joke. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, and I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a raw, jagged laugh, torn from the deepest part of my anger and my grief. When the laughter died, it left an aching hollowness in my chest. I got out of the car. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, pine needles, and decay. I pushed my way through the thorny blackberry canes, their thorns snagging on my jeans. The ground was uneven, littered with rocks and half-buried bits of old metal. The main doors of the barn were huge, made of heavy, weathered wood, and held shut by a thick chain and a massive, rust-encrusted padlock. This was it, the lock from the lawyer's office. I pulled the iron key from my pocket. It looked ancient, like it belonged to a dungeon, not a tool shed. I slid the key into the lock. It grated, refusing to turn. I jiggled it, pushed it, pulled it. Nothing. Mr. Henderson's words echoed in my head. You may have some trouble with it. I put my shoulder into it, twisting with all my strength. My knuckles scraped against the rusted metal. Still nothing. Frustration boiled up inside me. Even in this, it was a struggle. Nothing about this was easy. I was about to give up, to just kick the stupid door and leave, when I remembered an old trick my dad had taught me. I took a deep breath, and instead of trying to force it, I turned the key gently, almost imperceptibly, back and forth. I listened for the faint click of the tumblers. It was a delicate dance of pressure and patience. And then I felt it. A tiny, almost insignificant shift deep inside the mechanism. I applied steady pressure, and with a groan of protesting metal, the lock turned. The shackles sprang open with a loud clank that echoed in the quiet woods. I pulled the heavy chain away. The doors were swollen and stuck in their frame. I had to use my whole body to shove one of them open, its bottom edge scraping a deep groove in the hard-packed dirt floor. It opened just enough for me to slip through into the gloom inside. The air in the barn was heavy and still, thick with the smell of dust, rotting wood, and old oil. Sunlight streamed in through the holes in the walls and roof, creating brilliant, hazy shafts of light that illuminated swirling dust motes. It was like being inside a fallen cathedral. The space was larger than it looked from the outside. The vaulted roof soared high above me, a complex web of timber beams. Pigeons cooed from the rafters, their soft calls the only sound. To one side, piled high, were stacks of rotted lumber and rusted farm equipment. A plow, a seeder, things I didn't have names for. They looked like the fossilized remains of some great metal beast. But the other side of the barn was different. It was organized. A long, sturdy workbench ran along the wall, and above it, tools hung in neat, orderly rows. Hammers, saws, levels, wrenches of every size. They were old, but they were clean. The metal gleamed softly in the dusty light. Below the bench were cabinets and drawers, all closed. This was Liam's space. I could feel it. He had never told me he came here. He'd always said his hobbies were reading and hiking. He never mentioned woodworking or mechanics. Another secret. The list was getting longer. I ran my hand over the surface of the workbench. It was smooth, worn down by years of use. I could almost picture him standing here, his brow furrowed in concentration, his hands, which I knew so well, carefully fixing or building something. My anger softened, just for a moment, replaced by a fresh wave of grief. This was a part of him I had never known. A whole world he had kept hidden from me. Why? I started opening the drawers. The first few were filled with what you'd expect: nails, screws, sandpaper, all sorted into little jars and tins. It was meticulously organized. So unlike the chaos of his desk at home. This was the real him, I thought. Or at least, a version of him. In the bottom drawer, tucked away at the back beneath a pile of oil-stained rags, my fingers brushed against something hard and cold. I pulled it out. It was a metal box, an old army surplus ammunition can, painted olive drab. It was heavy, and it was locked, not with a key, but with a simple latch that was clamped shut. It wasn't the lock that stopped me. It was the single word, stenciled in white paint on the lid. Clara. My breath caught in my throat. This was for me. He had left this here, specifically for me. My heart started to pound, a frantic, panicked rhythm against my ribs. Suddenly, the dusty, quiet barn felt charged with electricity. This wasn't just a collection of old tools. This was a message. I lifted the heavy box and placed it on the workbench, the metal scraping against the wood. I stared at my name, the paint faded and chipped. How long had this been sitting here, waiting? My hands trembled as I worked the latch. It was stiff, but it gave way with a sharp snap. I paused, my hand hovering over the lid. I was afraid of what I would find, and afraid of what I wouldn't. Afraid that this box would answer my questions in a way that would shatter the last good memories I had of my husband. Taking a deep breath, I lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed foam padding, were two things: a thick stack of envelopes, tied together with a simple piece of twine, and a small, velvet-wrapped object. I reached for the envelopes first. My name was written on the top one in Liam's familiar, slightly messy handwriting. I untied the twine. The paper was thick and creamy, not his usual cheap stationery. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely open the first envelope. I unfolded the letter inside. The date at the top was from 2 years ago, just after our 3rd anniversary. "My dearest Clara," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means I failed. I am so sorry. I know you must be hurt and confused and angry. You have every right to be. I have left you with a mess, and the only explanation I can offer is that this mess was the only way I knew how to protect you." I had to stop reading, my vision blurring with tears. I sank onto a dusty wooden stool next to the workbench, the letter trembling in my hands. I read on. "There are things about my life, before I met you, that I never told you. I wasn't a good person, Clara. I fell in with a bad crowd when I was younger, made some terrible choices, and ended up owing a lot of money to some very dangerous people. I spent years trying to get out, paying them off, living in fear. And then I met you, and for the first time, I felt like I had a life worth living, a future worth fighting for. You were my clean slate, my second chance." The letter went on to explain. The debt was old, tied to a failed business venture his estranged father had dragged him into. The people weren't just loan sharks, they were organized, ruthless. When his father died, the debt fell entirely to Liam. He'd been paying them exorbitant amounts every month, which was why we never seemed to get ahead, why our savings account was always so meager. "I kept it from you because I was ashamed," he wrote. "But more than that, I was terrified they would find out about you. They have a way of using the people you love as leverage. My life with you, our little apartment, our quiet weekends, that was my sanctuary. I couldn't let them touch it. I couldn't let them touch you. So I built a wall between my past and my present. The cost of that wall was secrecy." He explained that the barn, this worthless, forgotten place, was his only true asset. It was tied up in an old family trust that made it legally untouchable by creditors. It was the one thing they couldn't take from him. It was his fortress of solitude, the place he came to think, to work with his hands, to feel like the man his grandfather had been, not the man his father had tried to make him. "I know it's not a palace, my love. I know it's just a pile of rust and rotting wood. But it's the only thing of value I could truly give you. It's the only part of my world that was clean. I am so sorry it's all I have to leave behind. I spent every last dime trying to pay them off, hoping that one day I could finally be free, that I could come to you and tell you everything and we could start our real life. I was so close." The last line was smudged, as if a drop of water had fallen on the ink. "I love you more than I ever found the words to say. Please, don't think my life with you wasn't real. It was the only real thing I've ever had." I finished the letter and let it fall into my lap. The tears I had been holding back finally came, hot and furious. I wasn't crying from grief alone. I was crying for him, for the secret burden he had carried all those years. I was crying from shame at my own anger, at the ugly story I had told myself about his betrayal. It wasn't betrayal, it was protection. A clumsy, desperate, and ultimately failed attempt to keep me safe. The barn was no longer a symbol of his neglect. It was a monument to his love. It was the only safe harbor he could offer me in a storm I never even knew was raging. I sat there for what felt like hours, surrounded by the silent, orderly tools and the ghosts of his secret life. The sun shifted, and the beams of light crawling across the dusty floor grew long and orange. I cried until I was empty, until all the anger and bitterness had been washed away, leaving only a profound, aching sadness. He hadn't left me. He had tried to build me a bunker. There were more letters in the stack. I read them one by one, each one revealing another layer of the life he'd hidden. Letters detailing his attempts to negotiate with the people he owed, his fears, his hopes. It was like reading the diary of a stranger who looked like my husband. He wrote about me, about simple moments we'd shared, a walk in the park, a movie we'd watched, a stupid joke I'd told. He cherished these small, ordinary things, writing about them like a man hoarding treasure. They were his fuel, the things that kept him going in his secret war. The last envelope in the stack was thicker than the others. It didn't have my name on it. Instead, in his blocky printing, it just said, "The Choice." My heart hammered against my ribs again. What choice? I thought the revelations were over. I thought the story had been told. It's funny how you can feel like you've hit rock bottom, only to find out there's a whole other level of the basement you didn't know existed. Have you ever discovered a secret that completely rewrote the story of someone you loved? It's like the world tilts on its axis. Every memory, every conversation, every shared glance gets cast in a new light. It's disorienting, and it's painful, but sometimes it's the only way to find the real truth. If you're going through something like that, if you're trying to make sense of a story that's been turned upside down, I want you to know you're not alone. This community, right here, is for you. So stick around, subscribe, and know that your story matters. Now let's get back to that barn. I was sitting there, holding an envelope that promised a choice I didn't want to make. My hands were steady now. The tears were gone. Something else was taking their place, a cold, quiet resolve. I had to see this through. For him. I opened the envelope. Inside was another letter, but this one was short, more like a set of instructions. Clara, if you've read everything else, then you know most of the story. But you don't know how it was supposed to end. I had a plan, a final move to get us out for good. Go to the workbench, third post from the left. There's a loose floorboard. I stood up, my legs stiff. I walked over to the workbench and counted the thick wooden posts that supported it. The third one looked just like the others. I knelt on the dusty floor, my fingers probing the edges of the floorboards. And there it was, a slight give, a small notch cut into the side of one board. I hooked my fingers into it and pulled. It came up easily, without a sound. Beneath it was a dark, hollow space. And inside that space was another metal box, larger than the first. It was a small, fireproof safe. It wasn't locked with a key, but with a combination dial. The letter gave me the numbers. Our anniversary, of course. With trembling fingers, I dialed the combination. The lock clicked open. I lifted the heavy lid. The sight made me gasp. The safe was filled with stacks of cash, $100 bills bundled in neat, bank-wrapped bricks. I had no idea how much was there, but it was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It had to be tens of thousands, maybe more. But that wasn't all. Beneath the cash was a slim file folder, and on top of that, a small, black burner phone. The final letter was in the folder. "My love," it started. "This money is everything I have left. It's the last of a loan I took out against my own life, a final, desperate gamble. It was supposed to be the payment that set me free. Clearly, that didn't work out. So now it's yours. It's your escape fund. It's enough to disappear, to start over somewhere new, somewhere they can never find you. No one knows about this money. No one knows about this safe. You can take it and walk away. This is your first choice. Freedom." I stared at the money. It was a ticket out, a clean break. I could go anywhere, be anyone. I could leave the memory of Liam, the barn, the debts, all of it behind. It was a tempting thought, a life without this crushing weight. But the letter continued. "But there is another choice, and it's the harder one. The people I owe money to, they aren't just criminals. They're smarter than that. They operate behind a legitimate front, a property development company called Viridian Holdings. You may have heard of them. They've been buying up land all over this county. And they want this land. Not this little quarter-acre plot the barn sits on. They want the whole valley, the state forest, the quarry, everything. They want to turn it into a luxury golf resort." My blood ran cold. Viridian Holdings. I'd seen their glossy brochures in the mail, their smug billboards on the highway. I'd even gotten a letter from them a few weeks ago, a lowball offer for Lot 7B, which I had thrown in the trash, assuming it was junk mail. "The only thing stopping them," Liam's letter went on, "is a patchwork of small, protected parcels of land scattered throughout the forest. Land that can't be developed. Over the last 5 years, using every spare dollar I had, I've been buying those parcels. Secretly. Through a series of trusts and shell corporations my grandfather, a shrewd old fox, set up decades ago. It was my secret weapon against them. My way of fighting back. I was slowly building a wall around this valley to keep them out." He had tucked another document into the folder. I pulled it out. It was a deed, but the property description was vast, covering dozens of non-contiguous plots of land, totaling over 300 acres of pristine woodland surrounding the barn. And the owner listed on the deed wasn't Liam Albright. It was me, Clara Albright. The transfer had been finalized a week before his death. "This land, Clara, is your real inheritance. It's not worth much in terms of money because it can't be developed. Its value is in what it protects. Viridian needs it to connect their larger holdings. Without it, their golf resort is impossible. They think they're just dealing with a handful of stubborn old trusts. They don't know it's all controlled by one person now. They don't know it's you. So here is your second choice. Stay, use this money not to run, but to fight. The burner phone has one number in it. My lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He only knows part of the story, but he knows about the trusts. He was bound by his professional oath not to tell you, but if you call him, if you show him this deed, he will understand. He can help you. It will be a long, ugly, and expensive fight. Viridian will not give up easily. They will try to intimidate you. They will try to wear you down. But you can win. You can save this place. You can finish what I started. The letter ended with a final, heartbreaking plea. I never got to choose my legacy, Clara. It was chosen for me by my father's mistakes. But you can. You can choose to be the woman who ran, and no one would blame you. Or you can be the woman who stayed and fought. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, know that I loved you and I believed in you. You were always stronger than you thought you were. I let the letter drop. The two choices laid themselves out before me, clear and stark. A quiet life of anonymity bought with a bag of cash. Or a brutal war, fought for a forest and a dead man's honor. For a moment, the weight of it all was too much. I was just a librarian, a widow. I wasn't a fighter. I didn't know the first thing about legal battles or corporate strong-arming. The money was right there. A simple, easy way out. All I had to do was take it and go. But then I looked around the barn. At the tools hanging so neatly on the wall. At the workbench, worn smooth by his hands. I looked out through a hole in the wall at the deep green forest beyond. This wasn't just a project he had started. This was the testament of his real character. He wasn't the man who ran from his debts. He was the man who stood his ground, who fought a secret, lonely war to protect the things he loved. He had left me more than a barn. He had left me a battlefield. And he had left me the weapons to fight. I picked up the burner phone. It felt heavy in my hand, like a weapon. I turned it on. The screen flickered to life, showing a single contact, Henderson. I thought of the gray man in the gray office. He hadn't been unkind. He had been constrained. He was a part of this too. I took a deep breath, the dusty air of the barn filling my lungs. It smelled like oil and wood and history. It smelled like him. I made my choice. I pressed the call button. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. Henderson. His voice was crisp, professional. Mr. Henderson, I said, my own voice surprisingly steady. This is Clara Albright. We need to talk. I'm at the barn, and I found a few things I think you need to see. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of him breathing. When he finally spoke, his tone was completely different. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by something that sounded like weary relief. Ms. Albright, he said slowly, I was hoping you would call. I'll be there in an hour. The hour I waited for Mr. Henderson was the longest of my life. I didn't pace. I didn't panic. I sat on the stool and methodically repacked the safe. I left the money inside, but took out the deed and the final letter. I put the other letters, the story of his secret life, back in the ammunition can. This was evidence. This was my history. As the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long, dramatic shadows across the clearing, a sleek black sedan crunched up the gravel road. It looked absurdly out of place next to my muddy, dented car. Mr. Henderson got out. He had changed from his suit into a more casual tweed jacket, but he still looked like he belonged in a courtroom, not a collapsing barn. He walked towards me, his expression unreadable. He stopped a few feet away, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated structure. He loved this place, he said, his voice quiet. It wasn't a question. He never told me, I replied, my voice equally soft. He couldn't, Henderson said. Client confidentiality is a cruel master sometimes. I was his grandfather's lawyer before I was his. I set up these trusts. I knew what he was doing, but my hands were tied. I was instructed to give you the key and say nothing more unless you brought me proof that you had found the rest of it. He gestured towards the file in my hand. I take it you found the rest of it. I handed him the deed and Liam's last letter. He read them carefully, his brow furrowed. He walked over to the workbench and used its surface to spread the deed out flat, tracing the property lines with his finger. He read Liam's letter twice. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were full of a new respect. He was a good man, Miss Albright. Braver than his father, that's for certain. He was trying to clean up a mess he didn't make. He left me a choice, I said. He did, Henderson agreed. Have you made it? I called you, didn't I? A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine expression I had seen from him. That you did. Good, because running is not the Albright way, not the real Albright way. He folded the documents carefully and handed them back to me. This is going to be difficult. Viridian Holdings plays dirty. They have deep pockets and an army of lawyers. They've already been sending you letters, trying to buy this plot. They assume it's the key. They don't know about the rest of the land yet. Our first move is to make them aware. Just as he said that, we heard the sound of another vehicle approaching. It was a large white pickup truck with the Viridian Holdings logo emblazoned on the door. It pulled up behind Henderson's sedan, blocking it in. Two men in crisp work shirts and steel-toed boots got out. They looked less like developers and more like bouncers. The larger of the two men swaggered towards us, a clipboard in his hand and a smug look on his face. Clara Albright? He asked, not even looking at me, his eyes on Henderson. I'm her legal counsel, Henderson said, stepping forward slightly, positioning himself between me and them. His entire demeanor had changed. He was no longer a quiet, apologetic man. He stood taller, his voice resonating with an authority I hadn't heard before. You're trespassing on private property. We have an offer for Ms. Albright, the man said, his smile widening. It didn't reach his eyes. A very generous one. For this little shack and the land it's on. Save her the trouble of dealing with it. He named a number that was insultingly low, barely enough to cover the property taxes for a year. The offer is rejected, I said, my voice ringing out in the quiet evening air. Both men turned to look at me, surprised that I had spoken. The man's smile faltered. Look, lady, maybe you don't understand. This place is a liability. It's worthless. We're doing you a favor. I understand perfectly, I said, stepping up to stand beside Henderson. I held up the deed Liam had left me. And you don't seem to understand that this worthless shack is just the front porch. I own 300 acres of protected woodland that you desperately need for your little project. And none of it is for sale. Not now, not ever. So I suggest you get back in your truck and leave my property. The man's face went from smug to thunderous. He stared at the deed, then at me, then at Henderson. He knew he was beaten, for today at least. He snatched the clipboard from his partner, muttered something under his breath, and they stalked back to their truck. They spun their tires in the gravel as they sped away, leaving a cloud of dust behind them. The silence they left was charged and triumphant. I was shaking, a cocktail of adrenaline and fear coursing through me. But I had done it. I had stood my ground. I had thrown the first punch. Henderson turned to me, a proud look in his eyes. That's how it begins, he said. Now, the real work starts. Are you ready? I looked at the barn, its rusted walls glowing in the last rays of the setting sun. I looked at the dark, silent forest that surrounded it, my forest. I thought of Liam, standing at that workbench, fighting his lonely battle in secret. He wasn't here to finish it, but I was. "I'm ready," I said. And for the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something I had thought was lost forever. Hope. That night, I didn't drive back to the city. I stayed. I had a sleeping bag in my car, and I rolled it out on the dusty floor of the barn. Henderson had left, promising to start filing the necessary legal paperwork first thing in the morning. I was alone, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt accompanied. The barn was no longer a hollow, decaying shell. It was filled with the presence of my husband's love, his struggle, his sacrifice. It was a home, in a way our rented apartment had never been. I lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the night, the chirp of crickets, the hoot of a distant owl, the whisper of wind through the holes in the tin walls. I looked up at the high, vaulted ceiling, where I could see a few stars peeking through the sagging roof. This was a strange and broken inheritance, but it was mine. Every rusted nail, every splintered board, every acre of silent, watchful trees. I thought about the two choices Liam had laid out for me: run or fight. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine the other path. The life I could have had if I'd taken the money and disappeared. It would have been easier, quieter. I could have found a small town somewhere, gotten a new job, maybe even found love again someday. A life without lawyers and corporations and battles for land. A simple, safe life. But as I lay there, on the hard dirt floor of his secret sanctuary, I knew it would have been a hollow life. It would have been a life built on a foundation of running away. It would have been a betrayal not of Liam, but of the woman he believed me to be. "You were always stronger than you thought you were," he had written. Maybe he was right. Maybe this whole terrible ordeal wasn't a tragedy. Maybe it was a crucible, designed to burn away the person I was and forge the person I was meant to become. The legacy he had been given was one of debt and fear. The legacy he had tried to build was one of protection and defiance. He had passed the torch to me, and I wouldn't let it go out. I cried a little more that night, but these were different tears. They weren't tears of grief or anger. They were tears of gratitude, of acceptance. I was crying for the beautiful, complicated, brave man I had loved and barely known. And I was crying for the woman I was about to become. The next few months were a blur of legal documents, tense meetings, and small victories. Henderson was a brilliant lawyer, a shark in a tweed jacket. He filed injunctions, he dug up old zoning laws, he presented my consolidated land ownership to the county board. Viridian Holdings fought back, of course. They sent more intimidating men, they filed frivolous lawsuits, they tried to bury us in paperwork. But something had shifted in me. I was no longer the timid, grieving widow. I found a strength I never knew I possessed. I spent my days at the library, not shelving books, but researching land use precedents. I spent my evenings in the barn, cleaning it out, repairing the walls, making it my own. I sold Liam's old tools, not for scrap, but to a young carpenter in the nearby town who cherished them. I used the money to buy lumber to patch the roof. The cash from the safe became my war chest. I used it to pay Henderson's fees and to live on. It wasn't an escape fund, it was an arsenal. I learned to see the world through Liam's eyes, to understand the fight he had been waging. I also got to know the community. The owner of the local hardware store, a grizzled old man named George, started giving me discounts. The woman who ran the diner in town always had a hot cup of coffee waiting for me. They had all been watching the Viridian fight from the sidelines, afraid for their valley. When they saw me, this young woman living out of a barn and taking on a corporate giant, they saw a champion. I wasn't alone in this fight. I was just the one on the front lines. The legal battle is far from over. It will likely take years. But the tide has turned. Viridian's plans have been stalled, perhaps permanently. The valley is safe, for now. I live in the barn. I've made it a home. I patched the roof, replaced the missing panels, and installed a small wood-burning stove. I have a small generator for electricity. It's not much, but it's mine. It's more mine than any place has ever been. From my door, I can see the forest, my forest, stretching out in every direction. Sometimes I walk for hours among the trees, feeling the quiet strength of the land, the legacy that Liam gave me. He gave me more than a choice. He gave me a purpose. He gave me a home built not of wood and nails, but of love and sacrifice. And he gave me back to myself, the stronger version he always knew was there. And that's the real lesson, isn't it? Sometimes the things that look like endings are actually beginnings in disguise. Sometimes the most broken down, rusted out places hold the most valuable treasures. It's about having the courage to turn the key, to open the box, and to face the truth inside, no matter how much it hurts. If this story has touched you, if you've ever had to find strength in a place of loss, I hope you'll join our community. Subscribe to the channel, and more importantly, share your own story in the comments below. Tell me about the barn you were left, the secret you uncovered, the fight you chose to take on. Because every one of us has a story of resilience inside us. And those are the stories that deserve to be told. Thank you for listening.